Hi there, I'm Rose, and today on Book vs. Movie I'm going into the delightfully spooky book The House with a Clock in Its Walls by John Bellairs, published in 1973, and comparing it to the movie from 2018 with Jack Black and Cate Blanchette. Why am I going into this slightly obscure book? Because I think J.K. Rowling used The House with a Clock in Its Walls to write Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And while I'm going through the sources for Harry Potter, I thought it'd be fun to cover this book as well, since it also has a movie adaptation that was made from it. I was new to John Bellairs, having skipped the Goosebumps side of the bookshelf as a kid. I was a bit of a scaredy cat, which is too bad because I missed out on some great writers. I also didn't realize that the entire Louis Barnevelt series was illustrated by Edward Gorey until I was flipping through the books. I love Edward Gorey, so it was a huge bonus to find so much of his work in the Bellairs books. Spooky spoilers, I'm going to go through the whole plot of the book and of the movie. The Louis Barnevelt books follow the young Louis after he has been tragically orphaned and has gone to live with his uncle in the town of New Zebedee, Michigan. We're introduced to Louis on the bus. He's a pudgy kid who is reciting an altar boy prayer for solace. For thou, O God, art my strength. Why have you cast me off, and why do I go sorrowful, while the enemy afflicts me? When the bus pulls into New Zebedee, his uncle Jonathan comes onto the bus to help Louis with his suitcase. Jonathan is a redhead with a potbelly who wears a vest and a pocket watch held on by a chain of paper clips, and he smokes a pipe. He takes Louis Barnevelt to his home, a huge old mansion he had bought just a few years before. They go inside, and Louis meets Mrs. Zimmerman, Jonathan's next-door neighbor and best friend. She's an older woman in a purple dress, standing with her ear pressed up against the wall, but steps back quickly when Louis walks in. Though it's late, Jonathan, Louis, and Mrs. Zimmerman sit down for a game of poker over a plate of chocolate chip cookies. Louis wins a lot, but he feels like he sees the cards change sometimes as they were dealt. At midnight, dozens of clocks chime the hour throughout the old house, and Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman look up, distracted. They show Louis to his new bedroom, which has its own fireplace and a huge old bed and a shelf full of old books. It seems wonderful to Louis, but he wakes up in the middle of the night when he hears a noise and sees Jonathan pounding on a wall in the hallway. Louis worries that his uncle might be crazy. But everything is normal the next day, and Louis spends the weeks before school starts exploring the town and his uncle's mansion. Louis observes more magical things in the house. Stained glass windows that change, and a mirror that shows a Mayan pyramid in a jungle. He observes his uncle going around in the middle of the night again, and follows him this time. Jonathan sees him and invites Louis to go with him, stopping all the clocks in the house. He explains to Louis that there is one clock they can't stop. One that was left somewhere in the house by the previous owner, Isaac Izard. Jonathan says that Izard was a warlock, and Louis asks if Jonathan is also a warlock, thinking of the changing windows. Jonathan says that he is, but a very minor one, and that Mrs. Zimmerman is a much better witch. Jonathan tells Louis that Izard was an evil wizard, and that when he moved in following Izard's death, he could hear the faint, incessant ticking of a clock in the walls. Not just behind one wall, but behind all the walls of the house. Jonathan tells Louis he had started filling the house with clocks to drown out the sound of the one in the walls. He doesn't know where the clock is or what it does, but assumes that it's something evil. Louis starts school and quickly becomes something of an outcast because he's fat and bad at baseball. He's alone on a baseball diamond one day, trying to hit a ball and doing badly when Tarby, the class cool kid, takes pity on Louis and starts teaching him how to hit. Tarby has been sidelined by a broken arm and befriends Louis while he's out of commission. They start hanging out, but Louis wants to impress Tarby, so he invites Tarby over and asks his uncle to eclipse the moon while he's there. Jonathan makes the moon go dark in front of Tarby, but Tarby isn't impressed, thinking it was just hypnosis or something. Louis is afraid of losing Tarby since Tarby's broken arm is healing, and he's spending less and less time with Louis. In an effort to impress Tarby, one day when they're wandering through the cemetery, Louis boasts that he can raise the dead. Tarby scoffs, and Louis tells him he'll let him know when he's going to do it. Louis then secretly studies his uncle's magic books when his uncle isn't around, especially the ones about necromancy. On Halloween, Louis and Tarby sneak into the cemetery, and Louis draws the magic circle by a grave and speaks the spell. They hear a noise from inside the crypt, the heart-shaped lock falls off the doors, and a black substance oozes out the opening doors of the crypt. Lewis sees two lights, like eyes, and the two of them start yelling, and they run away. Lewis runs home and doesn't tell his uncle or Mrs. Zimmerman that he tried to raise the dead, but he finds out over breakfast that someone had broken into the tomb of Selina Izzard, the dead wife of Isaac Izzard, and Lewis realizes he must have raised Selina. Tarby won't speak to Lewis at all after this. Jonathan, Lewis, and Mrs. Zimmerman go out for a drive and are pursued by a strange car. When they get home, they find someone has ransacked the house, but has only stolen a hidden clock key whose imprint they find. Lewis thinks it was Selina stealing the key that winds the clock in the walls, and the family across the street from their mansion moves out to be replaced by an old woman. Winter changes to spring, and Lewis finds a bunch of Izzard's notes stuffed into the back of an organ in an old unused room. On one page is written Izzard's description of a clock that would bring about doomsday. Lewis gives the papers to his uncle and then listens in surreptitiously from a secret passage while his uncle and Mrs. Zimmerman discuss them. His uncle says that the clock must be somewhere in the house, just waiting for Selina to come and wind it with the key. When that happens, Isaac will be brought back to life and will have the power to bring about the end of the world. They think the sound of the clock is there to scare off anyone who would poke around for it. Lewis feels terrible and tries to figure out what he can do to stop this, and he goes across the street to confront the old lady that he thinks is Selina Izzard. He borrows his uncle's wand, only to be laughed at by Selina, light bouncing off her spectacles in two white glares. Lewis is saved by Mrs. Zimmerman, who arrives in a purple cape brandishing her own wand. Lewis runs and is grabbed at by the trees and bushes at the front of Selina's house. He goes back across the street, and a big purple explosion rocks the neighbor's house. Mrs. Zimmerman comes back and tells Jonathan and Lewis that Mrs. Izzard probably hasn't been defeated, only slowed down, and that they need to find a clock. Jonathan realizes that they've all been playing by the Izzard's rules, and that Mrs. Izzard has probably just been waiting for the right time to use the key to wind the clock. So he decides to try something different, and asks Lewis to come up with the silliest, left-field idea he can think of for a magic ritual to find the clock. His thinking is that the Izzards rely on logic, so they should try the opposite. Lewis comes up with a series of steps for a crazy magic ritual, at the end of it asking his magic 8-ball where the clock is located. The magic 8-ball shows the message, coal bin. They all go down to the basement, where there is an old, unused coal bin in a corner, and find that the wall behind it is a fake wall. They knock it down and find a dark passageway behind it, where the clock is sitting on the ground. The sound of the clock is thunderous now, but just as they see the clock, Mrs. Izzard comes up behind them. Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman turn to confront her, and are frozen in place. Lewis doesn't turn around, even when Selina commands him to. Instead, he picks up the clock and throws it down on the ground, smashing it. He rips out the pendulum of the clock when he sees that the innards are still moving, and with that, the power of the clock is shattered. The ghostly form of Isaac Izzard disappears from where it had been gathering, and Selina is reduced to a skull and a black cape. Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman ask Lewis why he didn't turn around when they did, and he tells them that he saw the reflection of Mrs. Izzard and the hand of glory she was carrying in the face of the clock, and recognized it from his books. He tells them that he knew he'd be paralyzed if he turned to look at it, so he didn't, instead smashing the clock. A few days later, the three of them are burning Isaac Izzard's notes in a bonfire, and Lewis admits to having raised Mrs. Izzard from the dead. Jonathan tells him that he knew, as he had found Lewis's flashlight at the cemetery. Lewis asks his uncle if he's angry, and Jonathan says he's not, that he had once upon a time tried to impress a girl with magic, and understands Lewis had just been trying to impress Tarby. They ask how Tarby's doing, and Lewis says they weren't meant to be friends, but tells them that he has a new, much better friend, Rose Rita Pottinger. Then the fire dies down, and they all go to bed. So ends a terrific, spooky little book. I wish I'd read it as a kid. I would have gobbled up the Louis Barneveld books. Louis Barneveld is an excellent character, and I love the mansion and Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman. I loved how the story blends a kid just trying to get along in the world, with magic and a bit of horror. It was a great book all around. I enjoyed it. I'm going to go read more of John Bellairs. He was a great writer with oodles of style. And like I said before, I think J.K. Rowling used a lot of the plot points from this book to write Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It's funny then that the movie for The House with a Clock in Its Walls copies quite a lot from the Harry Potter movies. It's a bit of a reflection of a reflection. For some reason, the movie The House with a Clock in Its Walls has nearly disappeared in the years since its release in 2018. It was fairly successful, people generally liked it at the time, and yet it is almost forgotten now. If people remember it at all, it's because Jack Black was in it. The movie also has Cate Blanchette as a very glamorous Mrs. Zimmerman. At first, the film sticks pretty close to the book, bringing in Louis on the bus and having him met by Jonathan. Louis plays poker with Mrs. Zimmerman and gets his cool new room. He spies Jonathan listening at the walls in the middle of the night. At school, Louis is still an outcast, but now because he's a nerd who wears goggles everywhere. Tarby is a bit of a jerk, though he's still Louis's friend at first. Then the movie kind of veers a bit. Louis is visited by the ghost of his mother in a dream, who tells him he's in danger and has to get the book and the key. When Louis spies Jonathan hacking a hole in the wall with an axe, Louis tries to run away, but the house itself tries to stop him. A friendly chair gets in his way, and Jonathan runs down to try and stop Louis and explain what's going on. Jonathan takes Louis into his study, where he explains that he's a warlock and that Mrs. Zimmerman is a witch. When Louis asks about the ticking, Jonathan explains that the previous owner left some kind of clock in its walls. Louis immediately asks if he can learn how to be a warlock too, and Jonathan gives him a stack of books to get started, but forbids him from one cabinet. Louis becomes a devoted student of Jonathan's and learns how to do magic. Jonathan also explains that Mrs. Zimmerman has been having problems casting spells, but won't get into why. One night, Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman are giving Louis a magic lesson, and they tell him he has to find his own style of doing magic. Jonathan shows him by bringing down the stars and planets into a display in the garden. At school, Tarby gets his cast off and tries to ditch Louis. To get him back, Louis invites him over to the house, telling Tarby that the house is magic and that his uncle is a warlock. Tarby comes over and asks what's in the forbidden cabinet. Tarby finds the key to the cabinet, unlocks it, and takes out the book he finds inside, which is about necromancy. Louis objects, taking it back and putting it back in its cabinet, and Tarby leaves, telling Louis he's weird. Meanwhile, Jonathan finds a hidden entry into Isaac Izard's study and observatory, and finds the plans Isaac left. Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman look over the plans, but they can't decipher the writing. Louis's mother shows up again, and she tells Louis to use the necromancy book to impress Tarby and make him his friend again. So Louis tells Tarby he's going to raise the dead, and invites Tarby to watch. They meet in the cemetery, and the book shows Louis which grave to go to. Louis draws a pentagram and casts the spell, and when the top of the crypt lifts off, Tarby runs for it. Louis sees a hand reach out, and then he runs too. He makes it home, puts the book back, and goes to bed, pretending nothing happened. Jonathan goes to the graveyard and finds Isaac's grave empty, and the creepy dolls in Isaac's storeroom say that he's back. Jonathan tries to protect the house with horseshoes and jack-o'-lanterns. Louis asks what's wrong, and they tell him that Isaac has been raised from the dead, and that he was an evil wizard. They tell Louis to go stay next door with Mrs. Zimmerman. While he's there, Mrs. Zimmerman explains to Louis that Isaac and Jonathan used to be friends and partners in a magic act. Isaac went to fight in the war and came back from Germany changed and extremely powerful. He joined with the witch Selena, and they withdrew from society. He then died performing a blood magic ritual, which they think also took Selena too. Mrs. Zimmerman continues her exposition about how she lost her magic abilities when her husband and child died, and how she never fully recovered. Louis later sees Isaac's notes and realizes he knows how to decode them, but he is attacked by a flurry of books. Jonathan runs in to save Louis, and Louis takes them to go find a Captain Midnight decoder pin from a tin of Ovaltine. Translated, they realize it's plans for a doomsday clock that turns back time, obliterating all life on Earth. They realize it's all supposed to happen that night during the total lunar eclipse. They go back to the house, but someone has trashed the place looking for the key, which Jonathan has been holding. The three try to destroy the key, but it can't be harmed. Louis admits to using the necromancy book to bring Isaac back to life and apologizes, saying he wanted to see if it would work so he could bring back his parents. Jonathan gets mad, saying it was a mistake to bring Louis there, and Mrs. Zimmerman chews him out, explaining that this is what parenting is all about. Mrs. Zimmerman does some more exposition about Jonathan having run away from his family. Louis goes to save the neighbor from who he thinks is Isaac Izard, and brings her back to his house. She then opens the door for Isaac to come in. The neighbor changes into Selina Izzard and says that she was the one posing as Lewis's mother in his dreams. Isaac takes Lewis hostage and uses Lewis as bait to get the key. Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman find them in Isaac's hidden study and see Lewis caged by Isaac and Selina. Isaac then explains that he met a demon in the forests of Germany and begged for a way to end the wars. The demon gave him power and the plans for the clock. Mrs. Zimmerman reveals that she now has full command of her power and saves Lewis and Jonathan. Isaac does get the key, however, and he and Selina disappear. Lewis, Jonathan, and Mrs. Zimmerman are thrown out of the house by an army of freaky animated dolls and then get attacked by a lawn full of demon jack-o'-lanterns who spew sticky pumpkin guts all over them. The three of them explode the pumpkins and run over to Mrs. Zimmerman's house. Mrs. Zimmerman says they need to find the clock, but that it's protected against witches and warlocks. Lewis says that maybe he can find it since he's not technically a warlock yet. Lewis designs his own ritual and asks his magic 8-ball where the clock is, and the magic 8-ball tells them the clock is under the boiler. They fight their way back through the pumpkins and the animated dolls and make their way to the hidden room beneath the boiler. Lewis and Jonathan get there in time to see Izzard wind the clock with the key, and the walls and floor of the room fall away to show the workings of a gigantic clock going down into the earth. Jonathan tries to stop the clock, but is instead turned into a giant-headed man-baby. Lewis throws his magic 8-ball into the clock, which breaks it. As a final act, Lewis blasts the Izzards with bolts of red lightning, and the clock stops, preventing time from going backwards, and everything goes back to normal. The movie ends with the three of them as a happy family, and Lewis now with a new friend in Rose Rita Pottinger. Here's the thing. It's not a bad movie. I understand why they made most of the changes that they did. Turning the kid into Harry Potter makes sense. I mean, he is an orphan who goes off to live in a cool new home with wizards who look after him. Why not copy a successful children's movie? Ironic, again, because I think Harry Potter originally borrowed from this book. So the movie turns Lewis into a wizard. He throws himself into the subject, where in the book he only ever tries one spell from the necromancy book. In the movie he's casting levitation spells and mixing potions. Lewis also becomes a normal-looking kid. It's a bit sad that they couldn't or wouldn't retain Lewis as a fat, scared crybaby. They Hollywooded him up into a charming, normal kid, and tried to make him a nerd by giving him accessories. You're never gonna get a kid like Lewis just by giving him goggles. Lewis was a loser. Losers get taken pity on by kids like Tarby and then abandoned. Tarby becomes a manipulative little jerk in the movie, which is too bad. Both because in the book he was nicer, but also because it deprives Lewis of agency. In the book, it's Lewis's idea to try and resurrect someone to impress Tarby, but the movie has Tarby grabbing the forbidden book to Lewis's objections, and then Selina tells him to use it to resurrect someone. Nothing is Lewis's idea. He never does anything wrong. But that's boring because it cuts the character down. He's just a boring kid who does what everyone else tells him to do. The film also manufactured backstory for everything. Everyone has a backstory, usually heaped on in giant blobs of exposition. Isaac and Jonathan were friends and business partners. Mrs. Zimmerman lost her family, and with that, her ability to do magic. Jonathan ran away from home because he loved magic. Heck, even the clock gets a backstory. Who gave Isaac the plans? A demon in Germany in the Black Forest during the war. I'm fairly convinced the movie could have lost every bit of backstory and been not only better, but 20 minutes shorter. The movie also makes egregious use of the word indomitable. I don't know why they decided that this should be the motto for their movie, but they stuck with it. Everyone is, or wants to be, indomitable.
Lewis, you are indomitable.
Let's say it. Indomitable. Yeah, indomitable. The film also turns the house into a semi-sentient thing, complete with Cherry from Pee-wee's Playhouse, and animated sets of armor. Doing this, however, the house loses all sense of mystery. Lewis exploring all the odd rooms of the old house was a neat part of the book. But you can't really explore a house that's constantly jumping out at you, shouting, "I'm house!" I think that's kind of my biggest issue with the movie. While the movie was okay, it wasn't a good reflection of the book, because the book was actually pretty subtle for a kid's book. The scariest thing in the book was the constant, endless sound of a clock behind all the walls of the house, and the silver reflection of a light in a pair of spectacles. The movie was a loud, effects-filled Chuck E. Cheese in comparison, with buckets of pumpkin goo and an animated chair and a bunch of creepy animatronic dolls and a Jack Black man-baby. There's nothing subtle about this movie, and maybe kids don't go for subtle, I don't know. The film was pretty successful, making $130 million on a $40 million budget, so it actually turned a profit, and I can't criticize it for that. It's a good-looking movie on a pretty small budget. But for book versus movie, the book wins. The book was stellar. A great, somewhat scary kids book. The movie was okay. Not my thing, but maybe kids liked it? I don't know. Animated chairs don't really do it for me. There's nothing really bad about the movie, though personally I would vote for the giant-headed man-baby, but it's not a great film, and it's also not a great adaptation. Should you watch the movie? Meh. Cate Blanchette was pretty good, and Jack Black was fine. As a kid's movie, it's okay, probably better than average, but for an adult, I don't know, it lost me at the exploding pumpkin guts. But I also feel like a curmudgeon for this being my line in the sand. So, I don't know. Make your own choice. Side notes. If the concept for The Clock on the Walls feels vaguely familiar, it's because John Bellairs' book is a take on Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. The story by Poe features a madman who kills his father but confesses to the murder when he hears the old man's unceasing heartbeat from under the floorboards, where he had hidden the body. It is described as a, quote, low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. The madman has killed his father after becoming terrified of the old man's filmy blue-tinged eye, which fills him with horror. The House with a Clock on its Walls is a kid's version of this story. There's no murder and there's no bodies hidden under the floorboards, but there's still the subtle terror of hearing something strange and ghostly and clock-like from behind the walls. There's also the scare from somebody's eyes, or glasses in this case. Selena's glasses flash gray and fill people with fear. The inspiration for the book is pretty clear, and honestly I think it's kind of neat. Most authors stay away from riffing too much on Edgar Allan Poe because his work was so distinctive and so weird. It's referenced constantly, but was used as inspiration somewhat less often. In a separate note, if you're a fan of Edward Gorey and are old enough to remember this, he did the intro for the PBS series Mystery back in the 80s. I ran into this tidbit of information on his Wikipedia page and immediately went to go rewatch the intro, which I hadn't seen in a really, really long time. My grandmother would have it playing in the background when I was over, so I have a dim, ancient memory of this animated sequence. It's so good, and it was a kick to see something I'd almost forgotten. Animated Edward Gorey is amazing. And I cover this more in its own episode, but it bears repeating that Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets owes a lot of its structure and plot to the house with a clock on its walls. Harry Potter hears the basilisk from inside the walls of Hogwarts, but can't tell where the sound is coming from. When Harry finally finds Riddle in the hidden chamber beneath the school, the basilisk tries to paralyze him. Riddle is only defeated when Harry destroys Riddle's diary. Riddle himself had been mostly brought back to life by that diary. But you can see more details about how I think Rowling constructed Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets in its own episode. It's sad to say that I only read The House with a Clock on its Walls because I thought it had some connection to Harry Potter. I was reading it as background research, but I found that I loved the book more than I like the Harry Potter books, to be completely honest. Bellairs is a better writer, and Harry Potter fans should absolutely consider funding a copy of the book to see what inspired Rowling, and to read an excellent book. Read on, everyone, and thanks for listening. This is Rose with Rose-Colored Movies. Indomitable.